and welcome to the Can We Ask You This podcast. My name is Corey.
And my name is Rosalind.
Can We Ask You This podcast is a place to hear real stories from real people, gain perspective, get uncomfortable, and maybe even create some change. We want to hold space and give a voice to people who have been hurt by the church or wonder if they have a place in the church. This podcast is about listening, learning, and truly seeing each person as invaluable in the eyes of God.
Yeah, so on today's podcast, we have Jaimie, and you may have heard this intro where we say people who've been hurt by the church or wonder if they have a place in the church. And we haven't shared a lot of stories specifically about church hurt. We've shared a couple. Jaimie's story is about church hurt and how God has reconciled that and healed her in her life. So I found this to be a really encouraging, inspiring story. Thank you, Jaimie, for sharing. And we do want to give a trigger warning. So you're somebody that struggles with hearing stories about sexual assault. This may not be the episode for you. I think Jaimie shares it in a really sensitive way. Yeah. But if you're not ready to hear that, skip this episode.
Let's jump in.
Well, Jaimie, thank you for being here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank
you.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Glad you're here.
So maybe you can lay the groundwork. Who is Jaimie? Give us a little bit of background, just kind of where you grew up, family life, all those kinds of things.
Okay. My name is Jaimie. I was actually born and raised here in Calgary. I lived in Calgary most of my life, aside from had a little stint living out in Newfoundland for about 6 years. Okay. Back into Calgary. We lived in Banff for a little while. My son was born out there. Yeah, that's basically where I started, was here. I lived in Pembroke Meadows. I've lived all over Calgary. So I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life. I am a cabinet maker.
Oh, cool.
Now.
Ooh.
So yeah, I build furniture for a living, which is awesome. I couldn't ask for a better job. I'm really happy in it.
What's your favorite cabinet to make?
So we actually do a lot of retail cabinets, right? So when you go into a store and you see their cabinetry in those stores, that's the kind of stuff that I build.
Cool.
Lovely blending usually of metal and wood and all of that stuff that goes into it.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That is really cool. What made you want to get into cabinet making?
So my grandfather, when I was a little kid, he built me a dollhouse. And I had great dreams for what I wanted the inside of the dollhouse to look like, and I couldn't find the right furniture. So somewhere along the way, I decided that I was going to learn how to build dollhouse furniture, and that was going to be my job.
Wow.
I decided that when I was probably about 6 or 8 years old, something like that. And to this day, I've still never built a miniature piece.
Oh, you haven't? I was waiting this furniture, and do you have any of it still? Yeah, that's too funny.
I have lovely, beautiful, full-size pieces of furniture in my real house.
Probably more practical.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So can you tell us a little bit about your faith journey, kind of what that looked like growing up, and what has been faith for Jaimie?
Okay. So I was born into Church of England family. My parents came to Canada in 1977 from England and Wales, respectively. My dad was an Easter and Christmas Christian.
Okay. Yeah.
And twice a year, whether he needed it or not. Yeah. My mom was more faithful, and so my mom and I went to church every Sunday. I did Sunday school. I did when I was younger, obviously. So we were in the Lutheran church here in Calgary. Did Sunday school and eventually came into the youth groups. Right around the time that I was probably about 12 or 13, we did switch to an Anglican church at that point. Friends in the church that my parents had, and we all did life together.
Cool.
Right, which was amazing. So I was really involved with the youth group. I was in the youth group pretty well constantly. I loved being in the youth group. I loved doing all that stuff with everybody. And then eventually when I got to about 14 or 15, I transitioned into teaching Sunday school rather than just attending Sunday school. So the youth group, largely our youth group people were then teaching on Sundays. And then we did youth group stuff sort of other times in the weekend or throughout the week. During the Sunday service, we took care of the little ones.
That's cool.
Yeah.
What was your experience like going to the youth group as well? What was that like for your faith?
Youth group was amazing.
Yeah.
We had a really fantastic pastor. We had a really tight-knit group of people. The church obviously was much, much smaller than here at FAC. I think we were maybe a congregation of 200 or so. So there was probably about 15 to 20 of us in the youth group, not very much more than that. So we were all really tight-knit, all right around the same age, especially coming into high school. We were all sort of high school kids, and we hung out all the time and did stuff together.
Yeah.
So is it an overall positive experience kind of
Absolutely.
growing up of faith communities and kind of being a part of church. When did things start to change or shift, or kind of what did that look like for you as far as your faith journey as you kind of got older?
Well, sort of around the time that all of that was starting to happen and I was getting into the youth group really tightly and getting into sort of the older side of the teenage years is actually when I had my incident with the church that caused me to fall out of my faith. So I was 16 years old and I was sexually assaulted. Right. So obviously that's sort of a horrendous thing. My family were incredibly supportive throughout the whole process. I was in counseling, I was being taken care of, all of that sort of thing. But I really struggled at that time with how a God that loves me could allow this to happen to me, right?
Yeah.
And how this could possibly have happened to me. So I had really struggled with my faith at that point, that I was quite angry with God for letting this happen. That was the way I saw it at the time. So I actually approached the youth pastor and the pastor at my church to talk to them, to get some spiritual counseling alongside of my sort of non-spiritual counseling that was happening. And when I told them what had happened, I was removed from my teaching position. I was removed from the youth group. And I was told that forgiveness from God couldn't happen until such a time as I was ready to admit how my sin had caused what had happened to me.
Oh, man.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry that was your experience.
Yeah. So that was straight out of the mouth of my pastor. I went in to say, how could God let this happen to me? And what I got was, well, you caused this. This was on you.
This is a pastor that you trusted, obviously. What did that do for you? I mean, you're 16. What does that do for your faith? And like when he said that, did you sort of think maybe it was my fault? Or were you very sure it wasn't? Or what was that like?
I kind of felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room, right? Like, I think I literally may have gone into a bit of shock at the whole thing, because here
fair
was
enough.
somebody that I trusted with my spiritual life who was saying, you did this, right? And then I don't want to say I lost all faith in God, but it certainly didn't help my anger with it, because I thought, okay, I've come seeking help for this, and this person who is my pastor has said, well, God didn't do this, you did, right? Rather than sort of approaching it in a kinder way, I feel like.
A fair way?
Right?
Reasonable.
Yeah,
compassionate. Like there's so many.
Yeah. So this is obviously before the Me Too movement. This is back in the 90s. I'm a Gen Xer, and that's sort of how it was all handled back then. It was very much sort of, what did you do to deserve it? You know, all of that sort of stuff. So I left the pastor's office that day, and I walked out of the church, and I didn't come back until last year. So we're looking at, I think it's 24 years.
Wow.
Out of the church.
That's
before I was ready to even think about coming back in.
So for that 24 years, was it like kind of block all faith aspects out of your life? Or, you know, because you grow up, you know, learning these lessons, singing the songs, even if you want to talk about them for those 24 years, what was your faith journey like? If you could, like, what was happening kind of underneath?
So I turned away from the church completely, and I actually ended up going into sort of New Age spiritualism.
Okay.
I had a lot of friends that were into that sort of thing, right? So they sort of said, okay, well, you know, you don't have to deal with that. You can come here, and this can be a place for you. So very much sort of like earth-based spirituality and astrology and all of that sort of stuff.
You must have sensed the void.
Yes.
Because it was such a part of your life.
Yes.
And so then you're just looking for something else.
I was always looking for something else. There was always something that wasn't full that I felt, but I didn't know where to find it. And I tried for a really long time to find it in other spiritualities, and none of them fit.
Like, what other spiritualities did you explore?
I sort of fell into the sort of Wiccan style of things and sort of the polytheistic side of things. I even tried some of the Eastern religions for a little while, Zen and Buddhism and these kind of things, but it wasn't it for me. There was very much a sense of, okay, but nothing's happening for me. I had a great prayer life prior to this where I felt like I really could communicate, and I couldn't get that from anything else, right? Nobody on the other end of the phone, as it were.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. What was the consequence for the person who assaulted you? Were they part of the church, or were they anonymous, or did you ever find out?
Yeah, so I knew the person that
Okay.
had assaulted me, and there were really no consequences. We did, in a legal effort, went after him, but it's very much a he said, she said
Right.
kind of thing. And eventually the police were fairly kind about the whole thing, but it was just, I didn't want to keep reliving it over and over and over again to groups of strangers and have to keep telling this story to people that maybe didn't necessarily even believe that it was happening or weren't going to do anything about it anyway. And I just thought, I got to a point where I couldn't fight that fight anymore. And so I dropped it. And unfortunately, that does mean that he got away with it, but for my mental health, that's what I needed.
Yeah,
in that
you needed
time.
to get away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
absolutely.
Sorry, that was just out of context, but I was just thinking like this 24-year hiatus, let alone all the other damage it caused. But here you are now, like experimenting with like all these different religions, and it started with this one person, and then it was perpetual. It could have been so different.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It all cascaded, and it happened very quickly. Everything happened really fast. It was sort of a blink of an eye kind of thing. Like all of this happened within the span of, let's call it 3 to 4 weeks. From the time that the assault happened to the time that like all of this shook out.
When you met with the pastor. And
Yeah,
everything.
yeah. Like all of that happened within 3 to 4 weeks, I would say.
Wow.
Yeah.
You mentioned that your family handled it well in support of you.
Yes.
Did that continue? And what did your faith journey look like, for your mom, for the rest of your family? Did your mom just go to church and you didn't? Or did everyone kind of, after this incident, kind of pull away?
Yeah, my whole family stopped going to church at that point. And in fact, most of them haven't come back to it at all.
Wow.
So yeah, there's that outlasting effect of it's affected not just me, but my family as well. But my family are wonderful, and they have been so supportive through this journey, and like especially my mom. Right? Because she was so faithful. So for her to step away from the church at the same time as all of this was happening was a struggle for her as well. And she comes in now, she does online church through FAC. She's not ready to come back into the building yet, but she does her church online now. So yeah, she's been supporting me through all of that. And I had a teacher at school that was just like a second mom. When she found out what had happened, she really took me under her wing, and she sort of became that second rock that I needed.
It's
in there.
Really interesting because we interviewed, I think it was episode 6, we interviewed Lisa LeBlanc, and she shared her story of being sexually assaulted by a deacon in her church. And her family's response, and she shares this, was, well, don't let people know because we don't want you to damage the view of the church.
Right.
I actually think it's really cool that your family was like, no, you're more important than covering up whatever this was. So I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, there was a fair bit of outrage
Yeah.
in my family over how I was treated
Yeah.
on that, and that was the consequence. I don't know what happened behind the scenes. I've never really asked my mom about it.
Right.
I know she has talked about the fact that she has some church hurt, and I don't know if it's entirely related to this, but there's definitely some stuff there too.
Yeah.
There is certainly a cascading effect on the family.
Yeah. And what was your feelings during that time while you were, I mean, you said it happened within like 3 to 4 weeks, but then what was your feelings about the church in general? Obviously not a place you wanted to be, but on Christmas, would you celebrate Christmas, Easter, when your family, I don't know, did they just stop going Christmas and Easter as well? Or
Well, we did everything in a very non-denominational way.
Okay.
After that, it was sort of a secular Christmas and a secular Easter, right? But we still got together as a family. My family's pretty tight, so Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving, we tend to do stuff together. It very much became a secular sort of thing rather than a spiritual thing for us after that. But I still love the Christmas hymns and all of that stuff. I would still throw those on my headphones or whatever. It really did drop me completely out of the faith for a long time. I sort of spent a lot of time trying to fill that void with stuff that didn't fit.
maybe you can share a little bit about, you said earlier, it was like you were calling and there was nobody answering. What was there like anything in the back of your mind that was like, this wasn't how it felt when I was praying before? Or like, was there any smidgen of like doubt in those? Like when you described it, it sounded like you had one foot in and one foot out kind of, but I'm just curious what that experience was like.
I never considered myself to be religious after that, but I always considered myself to be spiritual.
That's
if that
something we
kind
hear a
of
lot.
makes sense.
Because you start exploring, right?
Yeah,
the
because I was still
spirituality.
looking for that. I was still looking for that connection, and I missed it. I was mad. I was mad at the church. I was mad at God. I was mad at my pastor, but I missed it, right? It was a big transition because we'd been so involved, right? And to step away from the church meant stepping away from my friends and all of these people that we had done life with that were basically family at that point, right? We stepped away from all of that.
Did they know what happened? Like, did your friends, suddenly you're gone, did they?
I don't know. I actually don't know the answer to that. I think probably some of them would have known what was going on, but I didn't talk to them about it.
You were just gone.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when did, kind of in your searching over the last like 23 years, when did you start kind of experiencing that draw back to faith? And what did that look like for you?
Oh, that came in the form of a very small little child.
Okay.
Yeah, so my son is the most amazing little boy. And when he was probably about 7 or 8, he started asking some really big questions about life and God and church and how come we don't go to church and this sort of thing. And I answered his questions as best I could and tried to keep my own bitterness about it out and just sort of gave him really clinical answers about this is why people go to church, that they're looking for some answers, they're looking for meaning in their life, they're looking for connection, this kind of thing. And
Where did that come from? Do you know?
I don't know. I don't know.
Interesting.
It all of a sudden it started and I asked him, I was like, did you talk to Dad about this? Did you talk to Grandma about this? No. It just sort of came to his head. Was the way that he put
That's
it.
wild.
That's really cool.
That's cool.
And then after about a year of asking these questions, and every now and again I would say to him, well, if you'd like to try going to church, I'll take you, right? I'll take you. You can try. Okay. But he never really asked, and I wasn't going to take him.
You're like,
I got over that one. Parenting win, right?
Unless he actually asked. I wasn't going to
okay.
take him, right?
but you were like being a very good mom, I just want to say.
Yeah, that's-
Thank you. That would be very hard for you to say that, I imagine.
It was hard to remain neutral about
Yeah.
it and not give him an impression of, well, we don't go to church, but lots of people do, and there's nothing wrong with them going. It's how you feel. And then all of a sudden one day he came up to me and said, well, Mom, I've decided that I'm going to be Christian.
Again, where did that come from?
No idea. We hadn't talked about the church probably in about 6 months, and he just came up and was like, Mom, I've decided that I'm going to be a Christian. And I thought, okay, well, maybe he's getting this from school. But the interesting thing is that my son goes to school in a school that is 95% Muslim and Hindu.
Huh.
So he's not getting his Christianity from there. He's not hearing about God at school.
Where? I
So-
want to know where.
I would love
Let's
to
have
know.
him. Episode 2. Part 2.
If you ever figure it out, let me know. Yeah, no, he was like, okay, well, I'm going to be a Christian. I said, okay. And then I met my partner, who is strongly faithful, was born and raised in the church, very strongly faithful throughout his life. And I was talking to him about my son, and he said, well, would you go to church with me? And I thought, oh gosh, here's a hard conversation to have. I wasn't quite ready to have that conversation, so I said, yeah, I'll go. I thought, for you, I'll go. For Torsten, my son, I'll go. No problem. And so one day, it was just the right day, the right time. Everything sort of fell into place, and he said to me, well, why don't you come to my church? And I said, tell me about the church. He said, it's big. It's really big. There's a lot of people at our church. And I thought, okay, that's perfect. I can go in there and I can blend right into the background and nobody's going to know I'm there.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to have any idea that I'm here and it's all going to be okay. And there was a little piece in the back of my head that thought, I'm going to burst into flames when I walk into that building because I've been out of it for so long. And I've done all of these other spiritualities over the years, and that's not going to be a good thing. It all worked out, and
you didn't burst into flames.
I did not burst into flames. I walked in the front door, and I thought, oh my gosh. And then I looked at my phone, and there was a text from my partner. I'm running late. I won't be there till service starts. And I thought, I've got to do this all by myself.
Okay.
Was your son with you?
Yes.
Okay.
So
nice.
I thought, okay, well, the first thing I'll do, I walked up to the front desk and I said, hi, I'm new here and I haven't been in church in 24 years. And she went, great, where do you want to start? I said, well, I'd like him to go to Sunday school. She said, well, we call that Discovery Land. I was like, okay, great. So I took him upstairs and then I came back downstairs and I walked into the church. And I'm looking for a spot to sit, and I sat down in the second front row. Not the front row, but the like one right back from the aisle.
You wanted to blend in, and you sat in the front
And I sat right under the spotlight, right? But when I sat down and I sat there, as soon as my butt hit that chair, I was like, okay, I'm home.
Wow.
I'm home, and this is where I'm meant to be. And that empty piece filled.
Oh, that's cool.
Right away.
Wow.
It was like, okay, we're back. This is where we're meant to be. It's going to be good. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. And then church service started and the music started, and I thought, there's a band. There's not an organ with a 90-year-old lady running the organ.
Cute organ.
Right? Yeah. But it was a pipe organ in my old church, and it was the old songs, and I thought, wow, this is like rock music. And it felt so celebratory.
Interesting.
And I thought, oh my goodness, okay, this is fantastic. The sermon that week was about coming back to God.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So I thought, all right, okay, I'm listening, because you've put me back here in this seat this day to hear this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So it was amazing. And at the end of the service, I went upstairs and I got my son, and he went, that was great. Can we come back?
And what did you say?
I said, yeah. Yeah. And we probably spent a good 4 months not missing a single service.
Wow.
Right? We came every week
awesome.
for a really long time. And, life gets busy and you don't make it every single time. But yeah.
So what has it been like for you as you're coming back to this place, that different building, but the church as an organization, as a body, has caused you a lot of hurt. But what's it been like in the last year, even in those first few months, kind of adjusting and reconciling all that hurt? So
for the first little while coming back in, every time I came back in the doors, I thought, sort of caught my breath and had to sort of go, right, no, we're going to do this. We're going to go in. There was a little bit of anxiety about that at first. And I think some of it was, I don't know any of the words to any of the music, although FAC is great, obviously, because we have the lyrics right on the screen. And getting used to the way that we do worship here, right? It's not, you don't open your book and follow along in the book with everything that's happening. It is quite a bit different. I really like it. It's really refreshing. I think if I had gone back into my same denomination, probably wouldn't have stuck.
Okay.
Because it would have been just too much of that.
What you're familiar with.
Yeah.
Environment.
Exactly. It needed to be something a little different.
Yeah.
And it's not to say, by the way, that there's anything wrong with, like, if you are in a church where there's hymnals and that's all. Yeah.
Oh,
but
not at
for
all.
you, that would have been very, like, almost triggering. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Although recently I've come to the point where I do kind of miss some of the old hymns, and when we hit some of them here in church, then it's even more sort of, I get that hit of nostalgia without the hit of anxiety to go along with it.
Wow.
When that happens. So it's always fun when we get to one that I know from my childhood and I can sing along without having the lyrics. But the very first time that I heard Living Hope, I cried in church because I thought, oh, that sounds like my journey in there. So yeah, it's been a bit of a bittersweet thing. Coming back to it, I wish I'd done it years ago, actually. But at the same time, I recognize I wasn't ready to come back at that point.
What has God been doing in your heart? What's he been kind of saying to you as you've been adjusting to all of this? Like, just when you say that you can sing a hymn without it being hard to sing, like with it being sweet, That just, for me, that says he's healed you. So I'm just curious what that healing has been like for you.
Yeah, I don't hear him as much as I did when I was younger. So I feel like we're still in that process of rebuilding the relationship. It's getting more easy to pray, to be in that space. And then a couple of months ago, I decided that what I really needed to restart my faith journey was to be baptized. So I did get baptized here in the church. I was baptized when I was young because in the Anglican church, they do it as babies. You get baptized as a baby in that church. But I felt that I really needed to rededicate that and to be into that again, right? To rededicate my life into God. Yeah, it was still building the relationship. I'm currently doing a Bible study. We're doing the whole Bible in the course of a year. So my partner and I are doing simultaneous Bible studies. He's doing a slightly different one than I am, but we're both reading the entire Bible again. So getting reconnected into the Word of God in a way, because it had been long enough that I didn't remember much of anything out of the Bible, except oddly enough for some sort of misconceptions that people tend to have about things that are said in the Bible, and going back through the Bible study has been really interesting, because there's stuff that people are like, well, God said this, and it's like, actually, that is not what he said. Yeah, so getting reacquainted with it, but there's a sort of peace that's come from all of this. This feels like the last piece that I needed.
Wow.
To be done with that altogether. Yeah.
That's really cool. So, thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
It's just a beautiful story, and thank you so much for sharing. Coming back to faith and, having this 24 years of searching and kind of like trying on different t-shirts, so to speak, of like trying to see what fits. Has there been any like residual in your mind or kind of things that have influenced the way you think that have come from, Wiccan or Eastern religions that you find have impacted you? Or do you, when you say that you've kind of come back to faith, was it kind of like almost like a reset on the relationship where kind of that's all like washed away?
I really dismantled all of the stuff from those spiritualities. So books that I had an altar set up in my house. I got rid of all of it because I didn't feel like I needed it at all anymore. And it was literally within that first week of coming to church. I went home and I was like, I don't want this stuff in my house anymore. Wow. I don't want it here. Because I felt like it was a negative influence. Huh. That's not really correct. Not so much a negative influence as it didn't fit with where I wanted my faith to be.
I don't know a lot about, was the altar part of Wiccan, or what was the altar?
Yeah, the altar was part of, not necessarily Wiccan, but because I never identified as a Wiccan, but it was part of the New Age thing. Yeah, so I had an altar set up that was sort of, little bits and pieces of things. Yeah, got rid of all of it.
So that I just asked because it's like, you were saying how I never really found much fulfillment in this, but like, that seems pretty committed. Were you kind of trying to convince your inner dialogue when you were setting up the altar, or what was that like?
Yeah, I was really trying to force it. I was trying to force some sort of connection. Okay. Yeah. So I just kept trying.
That's what I was wondering.
Right? It's just like, okay, well, it didn't work today, so maybe I'll try again tomorrow or at the next new moon or the next full moon, and maybe this time it'll be the time that it works. And it never was.
Okay, this is like crazy. I was telling Corey earlier today I was reading Psalm 1. Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who meditates on his law day and night. And I was like, it's really interesting to me that like in this psalm, it's talking about the ways of the wicked. There's standing, walking, and sitting, and those are like things that you do, whereas the way of God was like meditating and delighting. Mm-hmm. Not to say you don't have to move when you're following Jesus, but it was like, it's interesting when you're talking, it's like, I was trying to do all these things to convince myself, whereas Jesus is like, just come delight in me.
Yeah. You sat down.
Like sat
down. All I had to do was sit down here in the church. And it's like, okay, well, welcome home. Yeah. Glad you're here. Let's start over.
Cool.
Wow. And that was amazing. I got the impression that I was going to come back and God was going to be mad at me for leaving. But I very much got the sense of being welcomed back. He wasn't mad I'd left. He was happy I'd come home. I definitely, like the story of the 99 sheep and the one sheep, I definitely felt like the one sheep in that moment. But he clearly sent my son to come get me.
And like, you know, just how your parents were angry. I think of God as the father a lot of the time, and like, the anger you felt, is that called righteous anger? Like, God's not okay with the way you were treated either. And so I don't know, if you're a parent, wouldn't you also not blame your son if he behaved the way he did? Like, I'd be like, yeah, that was wrong. I don't blame you for being mad. Like, it's so cool that you sense that so clearly from him. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. And I have to think that my son's interest in Christianity and becoming a Christian and going to church and all of that kind of stuff was God just throwing out the breadcrumbs, leading me back in, right?
He's like, she'll do anything for him.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to circle back to that because I just found it kind of a fascinating part of your story of the searching and the seeking and trying to find the answer. And again, they were talking about so much of the doing, and it was just so beautiful of this invitation of what God wants to be in relationship with us, wants to invite us to rest and be with him. And I think there are a lot of people seeking out there and seeking different ways to fill that relationship, or oftentimes we'll say gap, right? That hole that you're just trying and trying. Maybe today it will work, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that is a beautiful part of your journey, and hopefully an encouragement for others who are seeking. There is someone out there.
Yeah, and he's waiting for you. And he's waiting for you to come back, and he's got open arms when you're ready, right? Like that for me was the biggest thing, that I really felt that he was waiting. And as soon as I came in, it was like, oh, finally, there she is.
There she is. That's good.
That's so cool. So maybe you can bring us up to where you are now. What said it's been a year?
A little over a year.
So where are you at now with your faith?
I feel better than ever about it. Yeah, I don't know where we're going next, actually. I'm still sort of looking for that piece, but...
Wait, do any of us know where we're going?
I was going to say, that's kind of like the
right?
cool part. That's the adventure.
He knows.
Yeah, exactly. I'm excited to see what he's got in store for me, because he's clearly been sort of working behind the scenes this whole time. Yeah, getting through the Bible, reading through the Bible. This will be the first time I've actually done the whole Bible. Yeah. Because, as a teenager, you sort of like, well, maybe I'll read it one day. And, one day's come along. I'm actually just about done the Old Testament at this point.
Ew.
So, yeah.
What a ride.
Yeah, it's been wild. And just to see all of the little things where it's like, oh, they talk about worshipping idols of wood that we've built with our own hands, and I thought, okay, that's me. Sorry about that. But the thing that I get the most from having read the Bible is that no matter how many times the people turned away from him, he was always there for them when they came back.
That's so cool.
Right?
Yeah.
And they did it over and over and over again. And he knew they were going to do it, and he always brought them back.
Yeah, I was just reading my son the story of Jacob, and I was like, this guy just really screwed up. And here God's like, I'm going to bless your family. And I'm like, really? Him? But God. Yeah. But God.
Yeah, well, that's just it. I think the most beautiful part of this has been watching my son. He's 10, so he's actually just going into youth ministry here now.
Oh, cool.
But watching him come out of Discovery Land and going, Mom, did you ever hear the story about Daniel and the lions? Did you ever hear the story about Moses and the ark? What about Jonah in the whale's belly, right? And I'm watching him get to know these stories that I knew so well as a kid, but I had never instilled in him.
Yeah. But also, what a gift to have that childlike amazement afresh. I don't know, just seeing it through his eyes too, and just seeing it for the first time through his eyes.
We're kind of going through that together too, because, when I'm reading the Bible as well, there's parts in the Bible that I'm like, oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
I always kind of like to ask this question, but if you could encourage the listeners, or if you have a word to share or something on your heart, whether it's yourself or if you feel like God is leading you, what would you share to listeners today about your story, where you've come from, and to encourage them?
Honestly, just no matter how far along in the journey you are, it gets better. The things that happened to you when you were younger, you're going to carry them forever, but it's going to get better. And there's going to be a light, and there's going to be a moment where that dark cloud lifts finally. And it may take years, but you'll get there, and it's going to be beautiful when it does.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. I know it's not easy to do, so thank you for sharing it. And I'm so glad you're part of this community.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for letting me share my story. I hope it helps somebody. I hope somebody listens to my story and says, maybe I should go back too. Maybe that's the missing piece for me as well.
Even if it was just us three here, I know it was an encouragement to me. And that's why I love the podcast is we get to share this conversation with others, and I know it will encourage and bless others. And thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Well, what a great episode. Appreciate Jaimie's openness and honesty. As always, I love our podcast that people can feel safe to share. And I just really appreciate her willingness to jump into some very difficult and challenging conversations. One thing that kind of resonated with me was, this is her quote. She said, "He wasn't mad I left. He was glad I came home."
Yeah, I love that part.
And I think sometimes a lot of us are afraid to come back because we're afraid that God is mad or he'd be upset of what I've done. And just to really understand her experience of that he was glad that he was home. And even her sharing about just sitting in a seat. The service wasn't even started yet. And just being able to sit in a seat and this like welcome home feeling.
And I think it's cool because it's not necessarily like the building. It's just, I think she had opened her heart to coming back. And I think that's what God was like, yeah, you're home. Like the service doesn't even have to start. You're home.
Yeah, you're where I need you to be.
Yeah.
And I mean, that can look like so many different expressions, but I'm just really grateful for Jaimie and her willingness to step out. Sometimes coming to church is very uncomfortable. And for her to have that courage to do that. Yeah,
I also really thought it was interesting when she said that I was, trying these other religions and new age things and like calling, but no one was answering the phone kind of thing. And it's like, I don't know, that just stuck out to me. Like that must have been very frustrating, knowing what she knew about her faith in Jesus before, and then just feeling like there's this disconnect.
And trying.
Yeah, and being told it was her fault. Like that's the worst.
I think that's why I appreciate, again, this podcast is for us to learn what it means to listen and to learn from mistakes. That was a horrendous mistake that had an impact not only in her life, but her family's life.
Yeah.
To really understand the power of words.
Yeah.
And also what it means to respond in a way that is helpful and not hurtful.
Yeah, I think
that was hurtful.
It was not right.
It was not right.
And look at the damage it caused. I'll just share one quick story because I think the times are so different now. But like I was in kindergarten and I remember a little boy in kindergarten asked me to see my nail polish. And I said no. And he's like, well, if you don't show me, I'm going to pull your pants down. And I said, no, I don't want to show you my nail polish. And I got sent to the principal's office because I was being difficult. As Jaimie was sharing, I was like, that was the mentality. Like, you're being difficult. It's your fault. I've never got sent to the principal's office any other time. And I'm like, and I stand by that. Like, I stand by that. That was wrong. I don't think I did anything wrong. And just like Jaimie didn't do anything wrong, but that was the 90s. I'm really glad things are changing. And that it did take 24, 25 years for Jaimie to feel safe in a church. But I hope that time is shrinking. I hope these kinds of things are happening less. I don't know if they are, but I think it's really cool she took the time to share her story like this because this is kind of how that happens as well. People feeling safe to share these stories. So
that you're not alone, right? That people have shared similar experiences, but that there's hope. We hope that you can find hope and healing through other people's stories as well. So thank you again, Jaimie, for sharing and opening your heart to us and to so many others.
Yeah. And one fun thing Jaimie did say, part of her experience coming back to the church was she listened to this podcast.
Yes.
So that was really cool. So if you know somebody that would benefit from hearing this story or maybe others like it, this is a really cool on-ramp. Like if somebody's not so sure about the church, maybe share this episode. And again, we never say that because we want more ratings or anything. We just really believe in the power of story and what God is doing. And so feel free to subscribe, follow the podcast wherever you're listening, leave a review. We have a question in Spotify that you can always go check out. Answer the question there. What did you think of the episode? We'd love to share that on the next episode.
Yeah, we're on YouTube now.
We're on YouTube. Feel free to leave a comment.
Lots of ways to connect with us. We'd appreciate that. Thank you, Jaimie. Thank you, Ryan, for the editing work and producing the episode. We really appreciate time and energy that you put in, because we wouldn't be here without you. So thank you for all that you do for the podcast as well.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, listener. Thank you for taking the time out of your week to listen to this, and we will catch you next time.
Bye for now.